If you were watching closely, and most people weren't, because most people were watching the leaderboard instead of the player, you would have seen it happen in real time. Not the shot, not the result. Something earlier than that. Something smaller. The moment his shoulders dropped exactly half an inch, and his grip loosened, and he stood over the ball with the particular stillness of a man who has stopped fighting something and started accepting it. That was the moment. Not the birdie that followed. Not the eagle 2 holes later that sent the gallery into the kind of noise that makes the birds scatter from the tree line. Not the final putt on 18, which the cameras caught from 7 angles, because by then everyone knew they were watching something worth capturing. All of that came after the moment. All of that was the consequence. The moment itself was almost invisible. A breath. A decision made somewhere below the level of conscious thought. A man on a golf course in the middle of a tournament he had been quietly, methodically choosing, in the space between one heartbeat and the next, to play a different way. Most turning points in sport look like this from the inside. Unremarkable, almost gentle, and only enormous in retrospect, when you can trace everything that followed back to that single, unhurried second. This is the story of that second, and everything it changed. To understand a turning point, you first have to understand what it was turning away from. And to understand that, you have to go back to Thursday morning, when this tournament began the way most of them begin, with weather that was behaving itself and a field that was cautiously optimistic and a leaderboard that had not yet become the particular instrument of psychological pressure it would become by Sunday afternoon. He'd started well. Very well, actually. A first-round 66 that put him near the top of an early leaderboard and prompted the kind of measured, professional enthusiasm from broadcast commentators who have learned not to commit too hard to anything on a Thursday. There was something clean about his game that day. Something uncomplicated. He described it afterward, in a brief media availability, as simply hitting it where I was looking, which sounds obvious, which sounds like the whole point of the sport. But anyone who has played golf at any level understands how seldom it actually feels that simple. Friday changed. Not dramatically. The course got firmer, the pins got trickier, and the wind arrived from a direction that the morning wave had not been required to manage. His 66 became a 71, and 71, in the context of this particular tournament's scoring, was the number that quietly moved him from the story to the supporting cast. Saturday was the day that set up Sunday. His third round was the kind of performance that gets described as solid by people who mean not what we hoped for. A 1 under par 69 that kept him in touch without pulling him into the conversation. He went to bed that night 4 shots behind the leader. 4 shots is a number that sounds like a gap and looks like a gap and, in the mathematics of final round golf, can behave either as a gap or as nothing at all, depending entirely on what the day decides to do. He knew this. He said as much, in the flat, careful language of a player who has learned not to give the press corps a headline they can use against him. 4 shots was manageable. 4 shots required the leaders to struggle and him to play the round of his week. Those two things would need to happen simultaneously. They almost didn't. Sunday began with promise and then did something more complicated with it. He was out in the late morning wave, which gave him the particular mixed blessing of watching the early scores filter through before he'd hit a competitive shot. 2 of the overnight leaders had already dropped shots on the front 9. The gap was narrowing. Not toward him specifically, toward the field. But narrowing is narrowing, and even 4 shots becomes 3 becomes 2 in the arithmetic of a moving leaderboard. His own front 9 was the kind of golf that makes you feel, watching it, like you are witnessing a very skilled version of treading water. Pars. Steady, unremarkable, professionally executed pars. 1 birdie on the 5th that briefly accelerated his heartbeat and the gallery's ambient energy. 1 bogey on the 8th. A mishit iron into a position that required a scramble, and the scramble came up 1 agonizing roll short of saving par. That gave the bogey back and reset the arithmetic to where it had been. Through 9 holes, he was 3 back, which was 1 closer than he'd started, which was progress, technically, which felt, in the moment, like not enough. His caddy, walking beside him between the 9th green and the 10th tee, said something. We don't know exactly what. Caddies are private people by professional necessity, and the conversations that happen in those transition moments belong to the partnership and not to the broadcast. But whatever was said, or not said, the walk between 9 and 10 had a different quality to it than the walk between any of the previous holes. Something shifted in the pace, in the set of his jaw, in the very specific way he was carrying the silence between them. The cameras caught it without knowing they were catching anything. Hole 10, birdie. A wedge to 8 feet and a putt that he read and stroked without hesitation, without the extra deliberation that pressure sometimes inserts into a routine. It dropped. He nodded once. Walked to 11. 2 back. 11 par. 12 par. 13. A birdie from a position that had no right to produce one. A recovery shot from the left rough that found the green against the geometry of the situation, followed by a 20-footer that tracked the break perfectly and disappeared with the specific authority of a putt that was always going in. 1 back. 9 holes into the final round. 1 back with 5 to play. And that's when the tournament, the whole, complicated, 4-day structure of it, began to feel like it was holding its breath. Hole 14 is a par 4 with a dogleg right that the course's designers described, in the original architectural notes, as requiring a decision off the tee, which is the polite, professional way of saying, you can play it safe and give yourself a long, difficult approach, or you can take the aggressive line over the corner and give yourself a short, difficult approach. The difficulty is present in both choices. What changes is only the nature of it. For 3 rounds, he had played 14 conservatively. The iron off the tee, the long approach, the steady par. Managed. Responsible. The golf of a man protecting a position rather than building one. He stood on the 14th tee on Sunday, with 1 shot separating him from the lead. The responsible play was the iron. The responsible play was the par. The responsible play was to stay patient, stay in the moment, trust that the leaders ahead of him would continue to wobble. He pulled driver. His caddy didn't say anything. When a player reaches for a club with that kind of certainty, not the certainty of someone being reckless, but the certainty of someone who has finally stopped arguing with themselves, the caddy's job is not to introduce doubt. The caddy's job is to hand over the club and trust what they're seeing. The swing he made was not the swing of a man under pressure. That is the only way to describe it. The swing he made was the swing of someone who had set the tournament down for just a moment, set down the leaderboard, in the gap, and the history, and the what-ifs, and simply swung at a golf ball the way you swing when nobody is watching. Easy. Committed. Free. The ball left the face and the sound told you everything before the flight did. There is a sound a perfectly struck driver makes that is different from a slightly mis-hit one, different from an overpressured one, different from a swing that has been manufactured under the weight of a Sunday leaderboard. It is cleaner. It is quieter, somehow, despite being louder. It is the sound of something that went exactly the way it was supposed to go. The ball took the aggressive line, cleared the corner, found the fairway. The gallery at 14 had been buzzing with the contained energy of people who understood the situation. When the ball landed, that buzzing became something louder and less contained, because they saw what the line meant. They saw the distance it had created. They understood, before the broadcast team had finished recalibrating, that the approach shot he now had was not the approach shot this hole usually offered. It was shorter. It was better. It was the approach shot you get when you stop playing not to lose and start playing to win. The approach was to 4 feet. The birdie putt was a formality the way important things sometimes become formalities, not because they lack weight, but because the decision that mattered had already been made. He made it without drama. Tied. And then something happened to the tournament's atmosphere that is difficult to describe accurately, but impossible to miss if you've ever been at a sporting event in the minutes when the narrative visibly shifts. The gallery at each hole he approached began carrying a different quality of attention. Not louder, necessarily. More focused. The kind of focused where people stop checking their phones and stop talking to the person beside them and just watch, because some instinct has told them that watching carefully is the only appropriate response to what's happening. 15, birdie. A wedge that left him a tap-in, and the tap-in never in doubt. Ahead of him, on the back 9, the overnight leader, who had been steady all week, who had made the tournament look almost manageable, made his first bogey of the day. And then his second. Not collapses. Not dramatic falls. Just the quiet yielding of a player who has been carrying the lead for 54 holes and has finally felt the full weight of it in his hands. The leaderboard, for the first time in 4 days, had his name at the top. He was standing on the 16th tee when his caddy quietly told him. He nodded, said nothing, took the club, hit the shot. Par on 16, par on 17. A 17 that had bitten 3 other players in the final round, that had a green sloping sharply back to front in a way that made aggressive pin hunting feel like a conversation with gravity you were unlikely to win. He didn't go at the pin. He went at the fat of the green, made the difficult two-putt look like a formality, and walked at 18 with a one-shot lead and something in his face that was not quite calm, but was not quite the opposite of calm either. It was the face of a man who is completely present in something that is also completely terrifying, and who has decided that the terror is acceptable, that the terror is, in fact, the whole point. He won. You may already know that. You may have come to this video because you know the result and you wanted to understand the story underneath it. That's the right instinct. Because the result, the name on the trophy, the number on the check, the position on the rankings, is the least interesting part of what happened this week. The most interesting part happened on the 14th tee, before the birdie, before the lead. In the moment when he pulled driver instead of iron, and somewhere in the mechanics of that choice, in the muscle memory of a swing made without fear, the tournament turned. In the post-round interview, held in the fading light of a Sunday afternoon that had given everyone involved more than they prepared for, he was asked about that moment. About 14. About the driver. I'd been making the conservative play all week, he said. And the conservative play kept me in the tournament. But I wasn't winning the tournament. I was just surviving it. And at some point on Sunday, I don't know exactly when, maybe on the walk to 10, maybe somewhere I can't fully identify, I decided that surviving wasn't enough. That I hadn't come here to survive. He paused. Not for effect. Just to make sure the next sentence was the right one. I came here to play golf. So I played golf. The room was quiet for a second after he said it. The kind of quiet that happens when someone says a simple thing that is also, if you let it land fully, a profound one. He came here to play golf. So he played golf. In its most literal form, that sentence describes a man choosing a driver on a Sunday afternoon. In its larger form, the form that stays with you after the broadcast has ended and the leaderboard has been archived and the week has folded itself back into history. It describes something most of us have wrestled with in contexts that have nothing to do with a golf course. The moment you stop managing and start doing. The moment you stop protecting what you have and start reaching for what you came for. The moment the tournament, whatever tournament you're in, on whatever course life has decided to build for you, turns. It always starts with a decision that looks, from the outside, very small. And it always